In this episode, we reviewed 7 Days in May, which was released in 1964. This was directed by John Frankenheimer. It was based on a novel by Fletcher Nebel and Charles W. Bailey. The screenplay was by Rod Serling, and it has a fantastic cast: Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Fredric March, Ava Gardner, Edmond O'Brien, Martin Balsam, and many more. So stick around for the review. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast exploring storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, theater, among other areas of the arts. I want to welcome back to the show Anthony King, who is the host of the podcast Cult Movies Podcast, which celebrates underseen films, lesser-known gems, and unrecognized masterpieces, maligned and panned by audiences and critics alike. It is based on Danny Perry's books. Anthony, welcome back. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Robert. I'm very excited to be back here. I really enjoyed our conversation on the Decameron.
The Decameron, yeah.
Last time. So and that was a movie I'd never seen before, and then you threw another title at me I'd never seen before. So I'm thrilled to be here again.
Fantastic. Well, that was the first thing I was going to ask was, had you seen it before? So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Just before we jump into the film, for people who haven't seen it, I'll just read a brief synopsis of 7 Days in May. This is about U.S. President Jordan Lyman, who Fredric March plays, hopes to bring an end to the Cold War by signing a nuclear disarmament treaty with the Soviets, much to the displeasure of the hawkish General James Scott, who Burt Lancaster plays, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When Scott's aide Martin Jiggs Casey, played by Kirk Douglas, stumbles on shattering evidence that the general is plotting a coup to overthrow Lyman in 7 days, Jiggs alerts the president, setting off a dangerous race to thwart the takeover. So what did you think? How did you feel about it?
In the past, I've had a hard time getting on board with Frankenheimer the first time around. So, like, for instance, Seconds, which I feel like 7 Days in May and Seconds really go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's part of like his paranoia trilogy with the Manchurian Candidate, this and Seconds. Yeah. Right.
So 60s Frankenheimer is sort of that frantic, it has that frantic paranoid energy. Mm-hmm. And so I was, to be honest, I was worried going in because I didn't love Seconds the first time I saw it. I now realize the masterpiece that it is.
Oh yeah, great film.
After a few more watches, this one, it starts off just so, it's so diplomatic. It's Fredric March in his office just talking. I was like, oh, is this going to be like a dialogue heavy, like slow? It's just, we're going to be in the Oval Office the whole time. And I was enthralled the entire time. I had to watch it late last night, and so it's close to 2 hours. I started at 10, and so I thought, well, I'll watch an hour tonight, and then I'll watch an hour in the morning.
Yeah, I saw your post on Instagram. I thought, okay, he's jumping in.
And I couldn't push pause. Like I had to finish it. I was so on board with it, and obviously I think our three leads are a main reason. All three of these guys are extremely charismatic. And it's so, I feel like we've been living in a world like this for, the past 5-6 years.
Oh, yeah.
And
it's eerily resonant to like the January 6th coup, attempted coup.
Right.
Just the beginning of last year, you think, oh my God. And I haven't seen this in a few years, and I forgot how much this film reminds me so much of that terror attack, basically. It's scary.
Yeah. The funny thing is, so we're recording this around the holidays, and like, I usually like to watch, lighter fare, fun stuff, exploitation that is just cheesy and cheesy Christmas movies and that kind of stuff. But if just a few days ago, I had a hankering to watch Mississippi Burning for whatever reason, because I have the Kino disc and I hadn't watched it yet, and I hadn't seen it since I was a little kid. And I was like, God, this is so heavy and again, so relevant. And like it was just so resonating. And so I was like, okay, I need some light fare. And then I put on 7 Days in May. And I was like, oh my God, another one that just it could have been made this year.
Yeah.
But what a fantastic, terrific. Again, I think it has all to do with March and Douglas and Lancaster together.
They're fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah. They're really fantastic. I like this film a lot as well. And every time I review a film where we have a very heavy plot, I always find that a little more nerve-wracking, because they're easier to consume in a way, because they require less of your own interpretation. I find, like, if it was a more character developed film where the audience is meant to lean in, a little more open-ended, which is generally my taste. But here there are a few things that are a little open-ended, but when a film is so heavily like incident driven and plot driven, not to knock it, I mean, it's done so beautifully. I always think, okay, what can we really dive into, and not just say, okay, this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, and things like that, because as soon as it starts, boom, it's like the engine's on and it goes, and it doesn't stop until the very end. But there are a number of things that I thought we could certainly focus on to get to the heart of the story. I mean, we have this coup that they attempt to Burt Lancaster as the general and the other generals to overthrow the government. I mean, what do you see this film being truly about? I mean, what is the heart of it from your point of view?
I think it's, what I got from it is boy, I don't know if this is a good or bad thing, but being able to surround yourself with people that you can absolutely rely on and implicitly trust. And one of my favorite things about this movie is, and I love possibly my favorite sub genre is Men on a Mission movie. And this sort of has a Men on a Mission portion, the middle part of it, definitely. And I love that it's the president of the United States that is the leader of this group, and he assembles this very select group of guys that he can trust. His personal Secret Service guy, just 4 or 5 guys. And he says, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And I loved what I got from it is that it was this male companionship. So for instance, when one of the characters, when the president learns that one of the characters dies, he is so struck down and he is heartbroken, and Fredric March is so good.
Oh, that's a great moment. Yeah.
At portraying that heartbreak. And he's completely lost in that moment. He doesn't know if he can survive without his, not only, colleague or, sort of right-hand man, but friend. He talks about how they had been together for so many years and they were friends, and he has just lost his friend. And so,
just to clarify, that's Martin Balsam.
Yeah, Marty Balsam. Yeah,
dies in the plane crash. Yeah,
correct. Yeah. And so this, by the time the movie ends, and we have that moment towards the end where Douglas gives Lancaster the confession letter and the letter from the president, right? it's sort of these two guys breaking up who were friends. They were colleagues. One was a superior, but they were still friends. And it's these two male friends that realizing their friendship is over because one of them betrayed the other's trust. And so it's funny. I went to a 12-step meeting last night, and it's a men's meeting, and we're all very, very close. And we talk about like the vulnerability that we're all able to share in this meeting. And then I come home and I watch this movie, and that's immediately what I pick up on it. It's these relationships between specifically these men,
Right.
who, military guys and like leaders of the country who have to be, they have to puff their chest out and act like they know everything, and that they're not going to let anything bother them. And that moment when Fredric March learns of Balsam's passing is just heart-wrenching.
Yeah, that was
And
great.
such a vulnerable moment. So that's what I don't think that's the picture Frankenheimer was making. I think, especially this period in American history, there's a lot going on, and even this period in American history that we're in right now, even world history that we're in right now, especially with stuff with Russia going on. Like it's all so relevant. But I really gravitated towards the male companionship of the movie.
That's a really great point. And that I imagine when you mentioned that scene towards the end, are you talking about when not Michael Douglas, Kirk Douglas, Kirk Douglas says to Burt Lancaster, when Lancaster accuses him of being a Judas, and he says, "Oh, I know who Judas was. He's basically you. You're the one who is betraying the country." Yeah, that was another, because Douglas really admired him, like the Lancaster's character, and to think that everything that they stood for, well, that he assumed Lancaster's, as Scott, stood for, which was to withhold the Constitution and whatever decisions they make in the Senate, that as the military you carry it forward, and that you don't have to necessarily agree or disagree, but you do your job. And what's interesting about Scott as Lancaster was that I read, and you may have read this as well, was that he was concerned about playing Scott because he felt as though the film was perhaps going to let the audience feel that the film was saying that the conservatives were villains, because here he's clearly on the, like, Scott is clearly conservative, he's clearly on the right, but Lancaster, Kirk Douglas got him to change his mind by saying, well, I think he's more morally ambiguous. And I think they really did get to that, because even though Lancaster as Scott, he is acting and carrying out a plan that is totally fascist. He's become a megalomaniac, but you do understand his motive. He not that I agree with it or think it's a good thing, but I think they empathize with him to an extent, because he's doing this because he feels that the country will blow up if he doesn't. I mean, we see off the top that he's trying to persuade, the Senate and president, like, you can't trust Russia to sign a treaty if we get rid of our nuclear weapons and they get rid of theirs, that they're not, he doesn't trust Russia. It's like they're going to attack us and we're going to be killed if we get rid of our nuclear weapons, that they will not withhold this treaty. And he just feels, hey, you know what, we're going to have to overthrow the government and start our own private army and kidnap the president, and I'll take over. And that great scene with him and March at the end, where March, as the president, confronts him and says, okay, we know what's going on. We know what you're doing. You're going to have to resign. And he plays it cool. I mean, he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he knows that they didn't have any concrete evidence, really, to say what they were doing, what Lancaster was doing. And there's this moment where he asks Scott, you know, he says, well, why don't you just, if you are against what I'm doing and you say you're so patriotic, why don't you just run for president? Why don't you just run against me? If you're so American and we have these democratic processes, why would you stage a coup? And again, he doesn't admit what he's doing, but he does sort of suggest that it's true, because he says there's not another election for like a year and a half or 9 months or something like that. So, you know, if I wait for an election, he really believed the country would just be bombed, nuclear war. So I felt it is morally ambiguous in the sense that he's doing it not because he's just like this cackling evil villain. He's doing it because he truly feels he needs to do this to save the country, even though he's doing it in a way that he may not even agree with. I don't know how you felt about that.
No, you know what? You're exactly right. And two things. One, I think a lot of it has to do with Burt Lancaster as a person. He, I would love to hear your take on it. He has this twinkle in his eye that
I love Lancaster.
It doesn't go away. So in The Swimmer, when, you know, he is so charismatic in that, and then at the end of The Swimmer, when kind of everything is revealed, your heart absolutely shatters.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
For God's sakes, Field of Dreams, I think is that was probably the first time I ever saw Burt Lancaster, but you know, that was maybe his final film, and he's this old, just winking guy.
One of them,
he's so great. And I watched is it 1974 Island of Dr. Moreau for the first time last October, and he plays Dr. Moreau, this absolutely psychotic sadist. Yet I was still like, I kind of like him. He's really so watch or even like Sweet Smell of Success.
Oh yeah,
he's a monster in that.
Yeah,
but it's still Burt Lancaster, and you can't help but sort of like this guy. So you have that, right? But then I think you're exactly right. It's this ambiguous character. I kept thinking, is this guy like a fundamentalist? The word fundamentalist kept coming into my head, and he's setting up this fundamentalist activity, but I don't think. I also kept thinking of Michael Bay's The Rock, where Ed Harris, like when the shit hits the fan and he's going to launch the missiles, he won't. He tells his guys, "I'm not really going to launch the missiles. What am I supposed to kill millions of people? That's not going to happen." And Scott, I think, is the exact same way. And I actually wonder if there's some sort of if Bay sort of based some of those characters off of these guys. Anyways, so I'm with you. I didn't hate General Scott in this movie, and I don't know if it's you know, I've gone through a lot personally this past year and sort of reevaluated things and like dropped all the hate as much as I can out of my life. And so I'm watching this guy, and even though he's on a politically different side than I would be, you're right. He's doing what he thinks is the right thing. He's trying to save people's lives because he's convinced that Russia's going to renege, and, you know, they'll say, oh, they got rid of their nukes. All right, time to bomb them, time to take it over. And so he's doing what he thinks is right, General Scott is. And you can't blame a person. You can't call someone wrong for believing something so differently. Their beliefs are not wrong. It's our job then to educate them and say, hey, here's this other side. And, you know, overthrowing the government, yes, absolutely wrong. I don't care if you're on the right or the left. You should not overthrow the government. Duh. And so, yes, he was going about this the wrong way, but he was absolutely convinced we don't have 9 months. The country's not going to be the country anymore in 9 months. We have to do this now. So, yeah, it's a really interesting. I don't think Frankenheimer was really playing sides here. He was showing perspectives from everybody.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I felt that way. I felt that way as well. And it also went to the heart of the film with these two different sides. The generals against the president and his men, was that, which goes to the heart of the film, where it's like, look, do you want to choose fear your whole life, or do we want to choose peace? Because if we keep choosing fear, we're going to keep building more and more bombs. and why are we doing this? I mean, and Ron Serling wrote it. Yeah. That monologue at the end, it's moralist. I know some people hate when films do that. I personally find that if it's done well, I don't care if someone is suddenly, like, in a way, like he's almost like a narrator, like he's wrapping it up. But I mean, it's a political film where there's clearly going to give, like, it's necessary. They're going to give speeches. They're going to be going in front of the press. They're going to be saying why they're doing what they're doing. So I didn't feel like, oh, this was just a way to make it easy for the audience and say, this is what this film was about. I felt that's, genuinely what would happen in a situation like this, to state his case. And he has, his approval ratings has gone down, right? But he truly because the country is also very, very afraid. I also like the fact that the film, I suppose they didn't want to nail the time period too closely to say, oh, this is what's happening now. So they made it in like the 70s. And I love, like, the video conference calls, like you and I are on a video conference call now, so I wonder if people watching that now would be like, oh, like, jarred by that, to think, did they have that in the 60s? Certainly in the 60s, they would have been like, whoa, I'm watching a sci-fi. Like, what is this?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think those are the things that sort of date this film. That, and if you're familiar with the actors, like, Kirk Douglas is so young in this, but and not so young, I guess, but
he was about late 40s.
I mean, the man always looked fabulous up until,
he's great. He really was good looking dude.
Right. But, like, it's the video conferencing, but other than that, this is timeless. You could call this a timeless movie, like, especially the themes and the topics are definitely timeless.
Oh, absolutely. Because so often in life, whether it's politics or not, we are sort of more inclined to choose fear, because we're worried about, like, what is the consequence going to be? Let's not take any risk. But it's good to be cautious, but when do you strike a balance here? So in this case, and this, of course, was also loosely based on true events. I mean, JFK really wanted this film to be made. Like, the U.S., the president, the White House wanted it to be made. He was having problems with the military, because they felt he was weak and he was soft, but it was loosely based on that. And so JFK, apparently, the book came out in 1961. He went to Kirk Douglas and was like, you guys gotta make this. So he was eager to get it made, and it was actually supposed to come out in 1963, but because he was murdered in November, they had to push it to 1964. Same with Dr. Strangelove, and I'm not sure about Failsafe, because that's obviously the same story as Dr. Strangelove. So all these political, paranoia, or in that case, Dr. Strangelove, satirical. Right. they had to push the dates. One thing that I really liked about the first hour was that, you get these, Kirk Douglas gets these series of strong suggestions that they're going to overthrow the government. But from at least from my point of view, none of those things seem like a big deal. They seemed odd, but I was like, okay, so, yeah, they have this army base, and he was trying to see if there was a phone line, and there was no line to even get in touch with this army base. He follows one of the guys who after a party, who went home, and the guy was saying, we got to be on alert, especially on Sunday, we got to be on alert. And he met Lancaster after this party. And then the next day, Lancaster told Douglas, oh, I was asleep from 8 to 8. So he lied about the fact that he met this guy. So yeah, he and there, I mean, it's quite detailed. I mean, there's all these strong suggestions. And then, of course, it's him watching the television. And I love the way they edited that, where Douglas, Lancaster is on TV at this political rally. And, he's talking about, patriotism, and he's very charismatic and getting the audience on his side. And they cut back and forth quickly between the television and Kirk Douglas. So you know that, okay, Kirk Douglas is getting worried here. And then when he goes to the president, he tells the president what exactly he thinks is going on, that they're going to try to overthrow the government. He doesn't know for sure, but he thinks that this is what's happening. And even, I don't know how you felt about this, but even when he says this all out loud, they're all wary of him. I mean, Bart and Balsam's like, nah, that's crazy. You got a huge imagination. The president's not so sure. And then, when he gets his men in that he can trust, they're all debating, nah, this is crazy. That's well, you've got a big imagination. And some of them are like, no, I think we should look into this. What I liked about the fact that they did it that way was that they weren't saying to the audience, they are definitely staging a coup. Because I think then he would have went to the guys, and the guys would have been like, okay, let's stop them. So we have this element where the audience is even in doubt. Because I mean, obviously I've seen it before, and I knew what it was about. But if you go into this not knowing the story at all, you're really sort of like, maybe they are just paranoid. I mean, the film could have went to this place where they were totally paranoid, and there was nothing that they were up to, which I found really interesting from a viewer standpoint, because it left the viewer in doubt, just like the characters. I don't know if that was your experience or not.
God, yes. Okay, so my go-to sort of film aggregator site is Letterboxd rather than IMDb. And so I don't watch trailers, and I try not to read much on a movie before I've seen it. So I just read the one little sentence they have in Letterboxd. It says, a U.S. Army colonel alerts the president of a planned military coup against him. And I wasn't even convinced that it was going to be Burt Lancaster who was in charge of this coup. I wasn't convinced there was even going to be a coup. Two, I wasn't even convinced it was Lancaster. I thought it was going to be one of these sort of names they had been throwing around that we were going to meet in the second half of the movie. And so that's why I kept watching. And I thought, oh God, like what is actually going to happen in this movie? I certainly hope we don't witness the coup, because I think that would be just scary, scary to think about. Right.
Thank God they didn't get to that point.
Right. But the scene, I love it when Douglas goes to the Oval Office. And even before he walks in, Balsam is like, this better be good, because it's, late at night.
Yeah.
So they walk in, and March is so like welcoming and nice. And he says, Colonel, have you ever been here before? No, this is my first time, sir. Would you like a drink? And Douglas is like, Scotch, if you got it. Like, he needs that liquid courage, right? And
right.
He sort of pussyfoots around what he's getting at. And eventually March sits down and he says, something like, spit it out, son. Like, we don't have all night. Can we get through this? Like, I was cordial up to this moment, but what are you actually trying to say here? And then he says the words, and you're exactly right. not only does Balsam and March not really believe him at first, Douglas isn't even sure of the words that he's saying, right? He's not even sure of it because and I think that's the power of Kirk Douglas's acting chops. We completely buy into this guy.
Oh yeah, I believe him.
Exactly. And so that sort of we're mirrored on the screen in that character. Like this stuff that he's saying, is this actually happening, or is he just seeing things? Like, what is going on here? And it wasn't until like the movie was halfway over where I think we saw Lancaster sitting in the studio or something. There was something where I was like, oh, okay, this is real. Then it takes that long to get.
It takes a while
to the point where the film is like, okay, audience, yes, a coup is actually being staged here, or attempted to be staged. So again, it's the performances, but you know, the direction. I think Frankenheimer's direction, especially during this time period, like I was talking about seconds, and I haven't seen Manchurian Candidate, believe it or not. I've seen the remake. I haven't seen the original. But
it's great.
It's that frantic energy, those quick cuts from face to face to face to face, and then like during Lancaster's speech when he's on television, it goes to the crowd, and it's eerily reminiscent. Of you know, Donald Trump's speeches and everything. It's like, oh God, we have seen this before in real life, and so I think it. And again, like. People have seen, like, this is real life. This stuff had been happening ever since George Washington was president, right? In America. Like there's always going to be a faction of the public and political leaders who are vehemently opposed to whoever's in charge at the moment. And so it's very palpable. It's very visceral. I'm sitting there thinking, oh God, am I watching a documentary or not? But then you have this sort of nervous energy, reluctant energy, I should say, from Douglas, who is many times like very calm, very cool in a lot of his movies, right? And here he's not confident in what he thinks could be happening. And so that's a really different character for Douglas to play, I think.
Well, I love the moment when he says it's one of the most unforgettable moments of the film when March is like, what are you getting at? And the camera moves right into his face when he says, I believe that they're going to try to take over the government. And then they cut to both Fredric March and Martin Balsam, not just a close-up, but an extreme close-up, which was just the way they utilized the shots, where they were, you know, everything before that, I mean, in that scene anyways, was medium or wide or nothing too, not an ECU. And suddenly they just go to these ECUs, and it's so emotionally powerful. And the first scene as well, I mean, we start off with these people protesting outside the White House, and this fight breaks out. And it feels like a documentary because he went right in there with the camera. It just felt like someone on the streets, which, you know, you see that now when these fights break out at rallies or protests and counter protests. And then, as well, you know, that was happening, as you said, from George Washington's day to then, you know, in the 60s, you had civil rights movements and of course the Cold War. So yeah, I mean, stylistically, that first shot is so remarkable. For me, I felt as though they were telling you that they certainly are trying to overthrow the government. Is when Martin Balsam, his job was to go to one of the generals he's an officer, one of the, I don't know the exact titles of all the different people in the military, but he was one of the people that they tried. Well, Lancaster, he was using coded words for, which was a bet for horses. But he believes those were codes for, are you in on this coup or not? And one of the people who said no, but I'm not going to be involved. That doesn't necessarily mean he didn't want to do it. Maybe he was just afraid to do it. Balsam goes to him. And I love the way they played it, where he was just sort of like, you know, he didn't want to just beat around the bush and say, no, we're really not sure. He was just like, yeah, we know what you guys are doing. We want a signed confession. And I thought, yeah, that's what you have to do. You have to scare them to see if it's true. And actually March does the same thing to Lancaster, but it doesn't work. At the end, he's like, we know exactly what you're doing. I want you to resign. But with this officer, it did work. I mean, Balsam's like, we know that, and the thing is, yeah, you didn't sign, but you also didn't say anything. Like, he's complicit because he didn't, you know, call whoever you call in a situation like that and say, this is what these guys are trying to do. He's allowing it to happen, whether he wanted to be directly involved or not. And that right then, because that guy signed the confession, and then of course Balsam dies in a plane crash. Yeah, right. Of course they killed him. Right. That for me was like, oh God, this is for sure. It's only really like Lancaster only really says anything with any kind of certainty until the very end. Yeah. When he's meeting with his men, and at this point he knows that plane went down and they don't have the confession anymore. And so he's like, yeah, let's I'm going to go on the press and I'm going to do a press conference, and we're going to push him to get impeached. We're going to try. I mean, he was losing his mind at that point. I mean, like, what are you going to do? And everyone around him is like, what was nothing we could do. You know, even when they got the confession, because the ambassador from Spain found it at the plane where the plane crashed. They got the confession, and they were like, and he still would not back down until those guys backed off. And I love that last shot where he goes into the car and the driver says, where to? And he just looks defeated. He's like, take me home. That was incredible, you know. But that for me was really what cinched it, was when Balsam just was like, yeah, we know what's going on here. And it was hubris at the same, right, for me anyways.
The cast of this film is bonkers.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll talk about Ava Gardner, who's in it, just
oh yes,
a little bit. We'll talk about her in a minute. But I mean, just, you got Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas as your military guys kind of going head to head. Fredric March as the president, Edmond O'Brien.
Oh my God, the Georgian drunk senator, and he's a Democrat.
I mean, he's, you know, I was like, he's almost playing, because he's going to be Sykes, right, in 5 years in the Wild Bunch, and so like he's ramping up to play this sort of grizzled, drunk Western guy.
I love Edmond O'Brien.
Oh, he's so good in this. And I was genuinely concerned for him when they held him at the base. They held him, right, and then they escape, right, and then he's at the train station. I was like, he's gonna die. And then they cut to the shot, and then he's there. He got there. Yeah, right. And Fredric March is on the telephone or on the video conference thing, and he's sitting behind him. I'm like, oh, thank God. But that's what I'm talking about. These guys, it's such a remarkable thing. I think, speaking of the Wild Bunch, that's another movie about male companionship and these guys just banding together and these bonds and friendships that form. And here we have something not like the Wild Bunch at all, but except for that male companionship, those bonds that form. Yeah. And it's just this small, very small group of men that they know this is it. This is all we can trust at this moment. And so it's, God, just, and then Marty Balsam is like one of my all-timers. And having him in this movie, you know, you kind of hate him at first because he's trying to protect the president by naysaying all this BS that he's hearing about this coup, but when he buys into it, I don't know, I was just sort of cheering for the movie, like, yes, here's the team, we got the team together, we're gonna do this. So pretty incredible group of guys.
He was in so many great films. Like when he's one of these character actors. Like when we think back at this period, Lancaster, Douglas, Ava Gardner, like Fredric March, that they're like the heavy hitters, the A-listers. But these actors like Edmond O'Brien and Martin Balsam. I think a more modern audience who don't know the classic period very, very well, those names wouldn't ring a bell. But of course, if you go back and watch films from that era, they're in like a number of classics. And one thing I was listening to another podcast about this movie, which also didn't dawn on me, was a lot of these actors were actually in the military. Lancaster, Fredric March served in World War I, Douglas, so many of them. And so it has that extra feel of authenticity. Even Frankenheimer, the director, whereas that it was very common back then for you hear of so many actors who went on the GI Bill, where they were able to then go and study acting for free because the military paid for it. Not just this period, but even some of the actors who were in I can't think of too many actors who were in Vietnam. Well, yeah, I guess really just World War I, World War II.
Right.
A lot of those actors were in the military and then became actors, which you really don't. Not that I'm saying, hey, all you actors got to go join the military to get some authenticity in anything that's military related today, except Adam Driver. I know he was in the military, but I find that really fascinating that these war films back then, these thrillers, those faces, Lee Marvin's not in this, but he was in the war. There's just, you can't act some of these things as effectively, I feel, without the faces of the likes of Douglas and Lancaster, who just were actually there, who were like, know these rooms, know these men. Even the way Douglas walks, I mean, he walks like a military man. It's incredible to me.
Well, when he walks into the Oval Office, he walks in and not, he doesn't stand really at attention, but his feet are together until the president addresses him. And then he goes a little bit, he relaxes. And then when he goes to leave, he addresses him, feet together. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And turns on his heel and walks out. It's very, it's these characters are very lived in because these, like you said, these guys lived these characters, right?
Exactly.
Not necessarily these moments, but these characters. I think of, I think you're right about like a lot of modern actors probably have no wartime experience because war was so different back then. It was the world war, and like the country came together and there's like everybody enlisted who could, right? But I think of guys like Oliver Stone, who were obviously greatly affected by the war and then come home and tell these great stories, Platoon and Born on the 4th of July and stuff like that. But yeah, it's very different now. And so like, we're in the season, I've watched White Christmas probably half a dozen times already. And like, these are guys that, lived the war. You think of like Frank Capra movies, right? He went out, John Ford, like they went out and they made the documentaries to promote joining I can't remember what the hell they call them, but promote joining the army and the military and all this stuff. And again, I'm quite the pacifist myself, but I do, again, what I think it is, it just occurred to me, I think it's people coming together for a common cause and everybody deciding, here's the goal, which is survive. We're going to come together and do what we can to help move forward and survive. And I think so we get to this period in the world, in our country, in cinema, and questions are asked. We I don't know what in God's name happened in the world between, the 40s and the 60s, but like all this paranoia creeps into people, and maybe it's something to do with PTSD, or I have no idea. But then we get these really intriguing thrillers like the movies that Frankenheimer made in the 60s.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think certainly the Cold War fed into that feeling that at any minute we're just going to be at nuclear war,
right,
which you certainly feel in this paranoia trilogy from Frankenheimer. I wanted to jump into, I know you touched on the relationship with Ava Gardner, and I wanted to get your take on this, because that was a relation, that there was some motives there where there's some, where it's a little open-ended in terms of what Douglas, what happens between her and Douglas, because she's at this political party in the first scene, and they seem to have a rapport. He mentions that she's very beautiful. She was drinking a lot, and he seemed to care about her. He's like, oh, he says something along the lines of, he's a little rough, but you're much nicer when you're not drunk. He's just straight up, and he's a beautiful woman like you. He says something along those lines. And so we find out then, that she had an affair with Lancaster, who was a married man. And later, when they're trying to figure out how to prove what Lancaster's up to, everybody has a different job, and Douglas's job is to go to Ava Gardner and see if you can find some dirt. And this is such a great scene, because Douglas shows up there and just starts making out with her. Well, that was just making out, but they were kissing.
Right.
And so, I was listening to some other people's take on this, and some people felt he was seducing her to get her to become vulnerable so that she would open up and see what he could find out. I didn't really feel he was there with any kind of intent to seduce her. I felt that just happened because I think he was really attracted to her, and it was just one of those things where suddenly there's a moment and we're kind of close on the couch and someone says something. I thought, again, the rapport between the two of them was beautifully done. So I didn't feel that he had planned to do that. And then, of course, when she mentions these love letters from Lancaster, right away he's like, boom, I'm going to take these love letters and we can use this to threaten Lancaster that you're having an affair, you had an affair. Here we are in the 60s, takes place in the 70s, but that would have been political suicide then. I mean, it killed your career that you were married and had an affair. How things have changed now. I mean, people do not give a shit if you've had, you look at Trump, even Bill Clinton. I'm not saying people didn't care, but I mean, that was a big deal. You look in the 90s with Clinton, and you think now with Trump and with the Stormy Daniels and
even the hush money, right? Exactly. Whatever.
Everyone's like, whatever. What about Clinton? He had a cigar in his mouth. No. But it's just so interesting how that has changed. But at the time, and this is also during the Hays Code, so to depict a woman who has had an affair, you really didn't do that. And I suspect that that's why they made her a drunk. It's like, you're going to pay for the fact that you had an affair with a married man, young woman. I don't know for sure. That's just something I suspect. But then she throws him out, rightfully so, when she sees, oh yeah, you're here to get these letters because you obviously want to use them to do something to Scott. I mean, how did you feel about that scene? Did you think he had planned to do that, or do you think that just happened?
I think that's really interesting. So they're at the party, and she's, nearly 3 sheets to the wind, and she says, why don't you, let's go get me another drink. And he takes her arm, pulls it down, and then, kind of not really forcefully, but, you know, grabs her, said, let's go back to your place.
Yeah.
He could have said, yes, let's get you drunk and then I'll take you home and then I can just ransack your apartment while you're passed out. So I'm wondering if you're right that I think we know Douglas is, I should stop calling him Douglas. His character Jiggs,
yeah,
is a good man, right? He's sort of the whistleblower of the whole situation, and like he has these doubts, these feelings about his friendship with Scott, and then these doubts about the coup is what he's seeing really happening. And so we know that he's an emotional man, and that he isn't quick to anger or take advantage of people. So when we're at the party, he says, "No, let's just take you home." Puts her hand down, no more drinks. Like I said, easily could have pumped her full of liquor, slung her over his shoulder, and just walked her home and went through the apartment. No, keep her somewhat sober, drives her home. And I think,
sorry to jump in, but actually at that point, that was before they told him to go there. So I think
was before.
Yeah, because I think what they were establishing was that there was an attraction between them.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. So the moment where he's pulling the letters out of the trash, and it's one of those like, oh God, oh my God. She like, she comes in and we see her in the background for like 3 or 4 beats.
Yeah.
Like an uncomfortably long time before she says something. I was like, oh God, she sees you. God, turn around. What are you going to say? And you can just sense that Jiggs is like, oh, fuck. I'm sort of made, right, in my little con that I was doing here. But 2, any sort of hope that I had for a relationship with this woman is dashed.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. I think he at first didn't want to take advantage of her, but was trying to figure out what information he could use. And the moment goes in to kiss her, and that she pulls away at first, and then there's another point where it's like a really passionate moment in a door frame, I think it is, and he's behind her, and it's very beautiful, and it's shot beautifully, of course. And you think, oh, this is a little romantic subplot that is killed when she catches him with those letters. And I gotta say, because not only would this have, I mean, we've seen this so many times when light is shed on people's affairs, the person doing the cheating is shamed, but it's almost like the other person, usually the woman, is the one that gets the brunt of the anger from the public. And so Ava Gardner's character, these guys were thinking, it's unfortunate, but she's expendable. So
exactly, yeah.
And so your heart goes out to this woman, especially when she catches him. And thankfully, like, nothing really comes of it. They don't use the letters because there's that great shot of Fredric March holding the letters.
He wouldn't stoop to doing that, right. which was interesting. And again, just looking at the difference to today, I thought most politicians, if they had something like that, they would have been taking a screenshot, tweeting it out. Look at this.
Yeah, immediately. Right. Yeah, without even talking to the other person first.
Exactly. Yeah, this is at a time when people has a little more moral essence to them.
little bit of
that's
classic.
Gone. Yeah.
Well, and see, that's the thing. I think you have these characters that have a lot of class. Even Lancaster, he carries himself well, and he's still respectful when he's talking to people. And I don't think many politicians nowadays who have these like lofty dreams of taking over the world or not even politicians, businessmen, maybe people who own social media companies,
Right.
have that sort of class and that sort of grace to not necessarily weasel their way in, but are more diplomatic and can use their words a lot better without just saying, throwing up a middle finger and tweeting out a photo of something or shitting on someone online publicly. And so you have all these characters who are going about it as best they can with as much class as possible. And so that's, I think that's another thing that keeps me from immediately hating General Scott, even though he's doing something absolutely wrong, absolutely illegal.
Yeah.
I still don't hate this guy because he does have that charisma, that class. So you can't say that about a lot of people nowadays.
Well, also, it's also interesting that, it's well known that Lancaster was a person, the man himself, not the character Scott here, was very liberal. Like, he was left wing, and here he was concerned about taking a part because he was worried that they were it may be portrayed as making the conservatives look like villains. And I thought, that's so interesting, because I think now where Hollywood is very open to being liberal and will make fun of the conservatives and not care about about I'm not saying you can't make fun of the people who don't share your views or and I'm not saying that you can't criticize them in stories, but it seems like now people are look at things much more black and white, and it's very us versus them.
Yes, absolutely.
Back then, we have this film where it's like, okay, clearly the military in this film are the more right-wing side, and the left-wing side are the president and people who work for him. But they strike this balance where they're not making you feel like anyone is an antagonist, right? I mean, there are antagonists, but that they're not, cackling villains. Whereas I wonder today if anyone would care. I think it would just be cut and dry.
Yep.
Whether it was a right-wing producer, the left would look like the idiots, and if it was a left-wing producer, the right would look like the biggest morons. And it's I think the fact that they humanize everyone and empathize with everyone is really important, and that's I find that to be quite strong. And I think I don't think we'd be talking about this film if it was more cut and dry. I don't know, but I don't think we would be. I think it would just be tossed into the political thriller bin of the day or whatever.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think it's used the word humanize, like we're watching human beings here. And I think a lot of times we don't look at people as other human beings. We look at people as, Christians or atheists or Republicans or Democrats. Yeah, right. Everybody has a label. Everybody is compartmentalized. And it's like, no, we're all very flawed people and we're all very unique and different. And, we have a movie like 7 Days in May, one of thousands from back then that portray human beings. And it's not
exactly.
And I think by the end of the movie, and I will renege on something I said earlier in the beginning of the show, I think we are sort of swaying to one side. We're swaying to the left.
Oh, for sure.
Right. Yeah. But it's not left wins, right is like, why don't you nuke those guys, right?
Yeah.
It's the scales are just tilted a little bit. Not necessarily, not way off balance. It's just tilted a little bit. And so it's a beautiful and I think that's why sort of that male friendship, that bond between these men specifically is what really jumped out at me in this movie, as opposed to sort of the political factions and military stuff, because it's a story about human beings. Ultimately.
Exactly. Yeah. No, very, very well said. I just wanted to lastly touch on that the scene with Ava Gardner at the end, where he comes back, Kirk Douglas's character, with the letters to give back to her. And I love the way it was shot. Like it's shot low to the ground, where we just see the letters, and we can only see the letters in his hands, and Ava Gardner looking at them in the doorway. And she's like, she heard the news that he resigned, and he brought the letters back. And he says, well, how about a rain check on meeting again? And she more or less agrees, which didn't quite sit well with me, because she doesn't know anything about the coup. I mean, the public didn't know exactly why these people resigned. I mean, because which always pisses me off in politics, is that these people could do these horrendous things and get away with it just because, oh, well, if the public find out, people will be so horrified, it's just going to look so bad, and people are going to get worried. Why don't you just resign? And it's like, meanwhile, they tried to stage a coup. They killed Martin Balsam, they kidnapped a couple of guys. But from her point of view, she doesn't know exactly what they did, other than that they used the letter to either threaten him, and he quit. And so now, here's your letters back. It's all good. So why she was just sort of like, yeah, it's all right. Like, she doesn't know the details of all this. So why she was so understanding, I felt that was sort of a way to tack on the possibilities of a romance between the two of them, and also to show that Douglas is, he had no ill intent, and so he's a good guy, and he brings the letters back. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't even say sorry. I mean, he's just sort of like, I mean, you could see he felt sorry.
Yeah.
But I just thought, okay, I can understand that they couldn't have another big fight there, right? Or something along those lines. But maybe it would have been interesting if maybe she just slammed the door. I think I would have bought that more. But I guess they didn't want to go with something so cynical, when at the same time they have this great message from the president at the end. I don't know how you felt about that.
Yeah, her character is interesting. I think it's interesting that they have such a big name playing this character, Ava Gardner, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
This very small character, which ultimately doesn't even really pay off,
right?
And so it almost felt a little tacked on. Like, do we need to tie up a loose end here?
Yeah.
I don't think you do, because we got the resignation. That's it. That's what we were going for.
Yeah.
And so it felt like, you could have shaved off 2 minutes here.
Yeah.
Off the runtime. Like, what's the point of this?
Yeah. I agree. I would have either not used it or had her just slam the door on him or something. Yeah. But again, I guess they didn't want to go there. They didn't want to make it feel like a bad ending, which I get. Right. It,
Yeah, I didn't know, maybe if it were a tacked on thing, if Ava Gardner was like, my character just can't be left out hanging like this, or if but again, we get a cool that line from Douglas, and he is like one of the kings of cool for me. He's like, rain check, and I was like, yes. Oh, yes, of course, rain check. I'll do whatever you want, Kirk.
Well, I've always loved her as well. And in the last year or so, I've been reviewing films with her. She was extremely subtle and natural and present. And you never felt that she was trying to do anything with the scene to make it about her or to be more emotional. I mean, that character could have been played in a way which would have drawn more attention to her. She could have like really lost it on Douglas, or maybe really played more of a drunk character and more of the pain of losing the man that she loved. But she's very simple. She's very subtle as she opens up to Douglas about the fact that she loved him, but he's cold and he doesn't show any emotion. And it's all there. It's all just beautifully shot and captured. And I think in a lot of ways, as an actor myself, that can be harder to do, because often we want to show what we're feeling. And generally people don't do that in life. And I thought it was interesting that she can just trust in the moment and just be there with Douglas and just play it out. And I thought their rapport was incredible. But I mean, I think that she is really someone. This is actually would have been her 100th birthday. I know that they are
cool.
The museum, the Ava Gardner Museum, where she's from, are doing a number of events, and she's the TCM Star of the Month this month. Yeah. She would have been 100. She died, really young, 68, relatively young. But I quite like her. I don't know if you know her work well, her filmography well.
Not super well. The Sentinel, this Earthquake, and that's it. But looking at her filmography, and when I hear the name Ava Gardner, I think like this prestige classic Hollywood type of actor, right? But look at her filmography. It's so interesting. The Killers, Night of the Iguana, right? You're talking about that.
Oh, so good.
Judge Roy Bean, Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, like Cassandra Crossing. It's really interesting. This filmography of her. She's not like, obviously she was on contract, right, for MGM, but later in her career, mid-century career, she's making really interesting choices and saying, I'll be in that movie, I'll do this movie. Really interesting stuff.
I agree. I agree. No, I think she also didn't think much of her own acting. Really? She didn't think she was really that good. And then you talk to like John Huston, who praised her performance in Night of the Iguana. And but I really loved her in this. And it was such a pleasure to see it again. And because I loved it the first time, and I loved it even more this time, for all the reasons we've described. So this was such a great talk. Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
No,
we left out, or
I appreciate, man, 2 for 2, Robert. These 2 movies I've never seen before, and holy smokes, what a pleasure. And the movie's already good, but then having a terrific conversation on top of that just sort of elevates it for me,
for sure.
And it becomes a movie that I want to rewatch now, having had this conversation. So it's what a fantastic picture.
Oh, I totally agree. And where's the best place for people to follow your podcast and find you on social media?
You can find me, the podcast, on Twitter and Instagram at Cult Movies Pod, and then me at AK Donnelly. That's AKDONELLY on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd.
Fantastic. Well, I will leave the links in the description box below, where you can follow Anthony on social media and check out his fantastic podcast. Anthony, thanks again. Such a pleasure. And let's do it again. Let's pick another one and talk another one out sometime soon.
You bet, Robert. This was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of my YouTube channel and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found. Go to youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner. to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.